Hi everyone, this is Lecture 35, Quantitative Traits and Heritability. Material here is found in Chapter 22, page 650 to 655, and also in 660 to 666. Last time we talked about artificial selection and how it could be used as a tool to understand this concept of heritability. Heritability is the proportion of the phenotypic variance, which is due to genetics. Question number 1. A trait with heritability near 0 would do what? Number 2. Heritability is the proportion of the phenotype variance due to what? So last time we ended with this concept of heritability. This value can be estimated by how rapidly a population responds to selection. In this panel on the right, here is our initial population. We chose some individuals, let's say tall plants, and they were much taller than the average, and the difference in their height from the average was defined as S, or the selection differential. Those tall plants were bred together to generate the next generation that were bred, and the average of the new plants was also the same difference in height from the original mean. We call that R, or the response to selection. And heritability is the response divided by the selection. And the larger that number, the more quickly the trait will evolve. In this case, R was equal to S, and so heritability is equal to 1. Defined another way, though, heritability is the proportion of the phenotype variance due to genetic differences. If a trait evolves rapidly from one generation to the next, it's because there's a lot of different alleles that can be selected for. Up to this point, we've really talked about a subset of heritability. It's called narrow sense heritability. Narrow sense heritability is narrowly defined in terms of just additive traits. It's the proportion of the phenotype variance which is due to the additive genetic variance. Think additive alleles that contribute to a phenotype. And so we can define this heritability as the proportion of the phenotype variance VP, which is due to genetic additive variance, or VA, A for additive. So again, narrow sense heritability, or HN2, is equal to VA divided by VP. And again, we can estimate that value by doing artificial selection experiments. And again, just to remind you, if VA, or the additive genetic variance, is equals to the phenotype variance, then the heritability is equal to 1. In that case, all the differences you see in a population are due to the genetic differences. And contrast that with genetic variance. If it equals 0, then heritability is 0. In that case, all the phenotypic variance that you see in the population would be due to environmental differences. So in the absence of artificial breeding, how do you calculate heritability? How would you do that for other populations, for wild populations, for example? Well, one way to do that is you can estimate this from parent-offspring regression. This is a panel from your textbook, figure 2211, showing 3 different examples. What this is they take, this hypothetical example is, I believe, fruit flies, where you have a population of fruit flies that you measure the parent's wing length, and then you average those parent wing lengths together to get a point on this graph. You match that point with the offspring from that mating, and the average offspring wing length would be plotted as a function of mean parent wing length. For this one on the left-hand side, if you had a Drosophila fruit fly that had short wings, like this purple point here on the left, and if it generated offspring that had also short wings, then you may suspect that it would be a genetic effect. And sure enough, when you plot this, if you have Drosophila that have long wings, they have progeny that have long wings. And if this slope is equal to 1, where b, the slope, is equal to 1, we can estimate the narrow sense heritability of being 1. There is a perfect correlation between parent wing length and offspring wing length, meaning that all the variation you see in the population, in this wild population, would be due to genetic differences. Contrast that then with panel C over here on the right. In this case, parent wing length really has no impact on the offspring wing length. For example, parents that have short wings may have offspring that also have short wings but may have long wings. In this case, the slope is 0. B is equal to 0, and so we estimate the narrow sense heritability of being 0. All the differences in wing length would be due to environmental differences. And of course, most traits are somewhere in the middle, as shown in panel B, where there's contributions from environmental differences as well as genetic differences. So even though it's not an artificial breeding experiment, you can still estimate narrow sense heritability using wild populations. You just have to collect data. This does give you some insightful notions with respect to evolution and response to natural selection. Traits that have high heritability tend to evolve rapidly, right? Because natural selection can select those alleles which will be more fit in the next generation. Traits with low heritability, in contrast, would not evolve rapidly, because there the trait simply depends on environmental changes. Maybe there's more rain one year that led to better outcomes. Maybe more nutrition was available that led to better outcomes. So narrow sense heritability considers only the additive alleles. More broadly, we talk about the so-called broad sense heritability, which encompasses all genetic variants. Genetic variants due to additive alleles, but also genetic variants due to dominance, recessive, and others as well. So the proportion of the phenotype variance due to total genetic variance is this broad sense heritability, or HB2, which is equal to VG, the genetic variance, divided by the phenotype variance. In this case, again, the phenotype variance is the sum of the genetic and environmental components. It's important to note that heritability is a population measurement. Up to this point, we've talked about artificial breeding experiments, we talked about parent-offspring regression. These are populations that you are studying. Heritability is a population measurement, not an individual measurement. It does not apply to an individual, but to a population. And as a correlation to that, it is a population-specific value, not a trait-specific value. It depends on the population that you are studying, because different populations may have different amounts of genetic variance. Different populations may be in different environments that have different environmental variances. So it really depends on that particular population. You have to narrowly define the population that you're studying. Here's an example. Here's a group of people that the question states the hair color. Is this high or low heritability in this population? Meaning, is hair color heritable or is it not heritable? And the answer is low. And why is it low? Because genetic variance is a minor constituent of the phenotype variance. This population has pretty much the same alleles for hair color. And so there's very little genetic variance. And when that happens, environmental differences can become important. So if there's low genetic variance, typically heritability is low. How about this population? Apologies to the people in the slide here, but is hair color high or low heritability? And in this case, you could argue that the heritability is high because genetic variance is a major factor. There are lots of alleles for different colors of hair. That leads to a large VG value, genetic variance. which swamps out environmental effects, with a few exceptions, of course. Let's look at an example that we'll discuss in class. I just want to introduce it here. But this concept of heritability is misused quite a bit in the popular media. So I want to just bring this up here. Here we have a population of mice. It's genetically variable, as you can tell from the different coat colors. Let's say we take this genetically variable mice population and feed them a high-fat diet. Guess what's going to happen to them? Well, scientists do this all the time, and guess what? They become obese. So the question is weight gain heritable? Is it highly heritable, low, or can it not be determined? All right, so I'm going to leave the answer for class. I will see you then.